Hi everyone, really excited to announce a new integration between FE Analytics and FE CashCalc. This has been asked for by many clients over the years, so really excited that we've finally delivered this. It essentially allows a user to take a portfolio in their analytics account, pass it across the divide into FE CashCalc, where you can then do all the cash flow on it. As you'll know, within FE CashCalc, when you set up a savings pot, it asks you for a growth rate, an assumed growth rate over the coming years. Now, obviously, that's quite difficult, and at the moment, it's a bit of a guesstimate. My client's got a balanced solution, so I think 5% seems quite logical. So I use 5%, and maybe my client's also got some cautious solutions. So I don't know, maybe 3.5% seems reasonable for that. This all sounds wonderful, but of course, as we know, when compliance comes knocking and the FCA comes knocking and asks you for the logic as to why you've put these growth rates in here that drive the cash flow, it's such a critical assumption that you're putting in there. Obviously, that's not really going to wash. There needs to be some sort of scientific logic that backs this up, and this is what we're trying to hopefully solve for you by providing with that logic and basically generating those growth rates for you based on the underlying asset allocation sitting in analytics. So how does this work in practice? Well, on the left-hand side over here, I'm in analytics. This will work on any portfolio. This portfolio itself is actually an MPS on our MPS directory. But again, I repeat, any portfolio, you could have a portfolio of one fund. You could have a portfolio of a handful of multi-asset funds. You could have obviously a portfolio of 30 single manager funds. And equally, you could have a portfolio of a handful of MPS solutions. Quite simply, any portfolio on analytics, it will always derive an asset allocation, which then will derive the figures on CashCalc. Now, you'll see a couple of months ago, we also released our advisor asset integration as well. So this same portfolio can be pushed into that part of our ecosystem. So you can run all the charge comparisons, but now you can click on export to FE CashCalc, and you can actually export two different things to FE CashCalc. You can export the linear growth rate, which I've just mentioned, but you can also export the asset allocation template, which drives the Monte Carlo tool. So we're going to do both on this demonstration. I'll explain those. What do I want the template to be called? Kind of makes sense to call it the name of the portfolio. This is my MPS Risk Profile 5 solution, so I'll just keep it at that. And if I click on Create Template, on the fly, it's creating that on the CashCalc side for me. And then I can launch myself into FE CashCalc using that single sign-on. And within FE CashCalc, you'll see under the investment proposition, that's where we've landed, just to basically show you where the data's gone. Under growth templates, you've now got portfolio tab, and as if by magic, there's the two portfolios I've pulled across. I've already pulled across my risk profile 8 solution. I've now just pulled across the risk grade 5 as well. And under asset allocation, you've got exactly the same thing. Click on open portfolios. You've got risk grade 5 and risk grade 8. And if you click on any one of them, it shows you what it's pulled across. So the asset allocation template here and the growth template will also pull across the growth rate that it's going to be using moving forward. Now I can tether these to risk profiles as well. So if I go to my eValue risk profile 3, scroll down a bit, maybe my risk profile 5 solution that I've just pulled across, that balance solution we've just pulled across from analytics, is a risk profile 3. So I can now set that model portfolio as part of the risk profile 3 on eValue. So we'll just confirm that, and that will come into play in a couple of moments. So we'll save those changes. But now I need to look at a cash flow. So let's go into clients at the very top. We're going to dive into a client called Keith Baker. Been working on a cash flow with this client for a while now. You can click on cash flow. This is the one I want to adjust. So let's just open this up. And Keith's got a couple of pots here. He's got an Aviva ISA, he's got a Standard Life personal pension, and he's also got an NS&I premium bond. And if I click on the pots, you'll see the logic I've used. NS&I growing at about 3%, which I can validate with SNR and I, of course. Standard Life personal pension, I've assumed because it's a balanced solution, it's growing at about 5%. And the Aviva ISA, a little bit more adventurous, so I've assumed a 6% growth rate. And if you click on my cash flow model chart, I've got a relatively traditional chart image where my client's just about to retire. They're going to draw down those assets, and those assets will run out by the time they're about 92, 93. And there's obviously a big amount of red here. So if they were to live to that ripe old age of 100, it would be minus 73k in the red. And equally, their standard life pot itself, the big pension, will run out by the time they're about 82. Now, how does this change if I'm now using the logic of analytics or the data I'm pulling across from analytics? Well, if I come back to my savings pots, if I edit that pension, and if I, rather than using an input that I've put myself, I can just simply use a template. And again, it's just simply under portfolios. So open that up. And again, hey presto, I've got the two that I've just pulled across from analytics. I'll go and grab risk grade 5. And as if by magic, there it is. That's the growth rate CashCalc is telling me I should be using or I should consider using. And again, it's just looking at the asset allocation today of your portfolio. It's got an annualized growth rate of every single asset class going back 40 years. So basically like an average, and it knows the percentage weighting in each asset class, because again, we have that data, and it aggregates that into a bespoke growth rate for that passive risk grade 5 portfolio. And obviously a real return, because it's then removing the inflation assumption that I've already added into my CashCalc account. So I can update this pension pot. I can do exactly the same with my Aviva ISA. I wasn't far off my logic, just under 1%. So I can edit my Aviva ISA, and I can do exactly the same thing. This ISA is invested into that risk profile 8 solution. So I just want to select that rather than, again, guesstimating a figure. And actually, I was quite far off. 6% I had initially. It's actually 7.38 the system suggests I should be using. So I'm going to update that savings pot as well, again, in a more adventurous solution. Once that's all saved, if I come back to my cash flow model, suddenly it's now looking a lot different. Now, clearly, even if it's a very small difference, maybe I had 5% and it's now suggesting 5.3. When we're talking about big pots of money, when we're talking about long-term horizons, when we're talking about compounding, that can make a significant difference on these cash flows. That's why it's so vital to make sure that growth rate is as accurate or kind of scientifically as logical as it could be. And as you can see, suddenly my standard life pot is not running out now until my client's about 88. And the overall assets, if my client were to live to that ripe old age of 100, suddenly they're not in the red. They've actually got a massively positive growth of 160,000 left in their remaining assets. So that's the growth rate pulling across neatly. Where does the asset allocation pop up? Well, if you click on stress testing, as we can see, that standard life pot is running out by the time they're 88. So let's stress test that one. So we can go to Monte Carlo. We can click on standard life personal pension, run the simulation. The minimum threshold, you can have this whatever you like, but I'm going to suggest that my client just doesn't want that money to run out. So we're going to set the minimum threshold at essentially 0. Client's got a risk profile 3, and as if by magic, because I've tethered it, there's my risk profile 5 solution that's pulled across. Now the asset allocation pulls into this, creates all of the figures, and again, I can set that to 88, which is when the pot is currently running out. And if I run 10,000 simulations over the top, I can now stress test that again. So I can give myself and my client a bit of comfort that yes, the original cash flow looked pretty positive. It was suggesting that you'd be until your late 80s, Mr. and Mrs. Client, before that money ran out. But then I can run 10,000 simulations over the top of that and give, again, my client and myself some comfort to see that there's a 70% or 70% of all of those simulations were above the value of £0 by the time my client hit 88, 89. And again, this is going to really help me if again the FCA come knocking or compliance team come knocking. I've now got a lot more information that I can put into my client file that backs up why I'm making these assumptions that I am on that cash flow. So really excited to see how clients introduce this to their investors and their clients. Clearly, that's just a very simple example, but ultimately you can use this to start running comparisons. So again, if I'm looking at these solutions thinking, should I put my client into a risk grade 5 or maybe a risk grade 6 solution, I could easily create duplicate cash flows at the very top. And then under options, I can compare the cash flows against one another. So me and my client can actually visualize that illustration and the comparison and the differences between investing in a 5 versus a 6 solution, for example. So hopefully you found that useful. Any questions as ever, reach out to us, either your account manager or on the left-hand side within analytics under the Contact Us tab. You've got our phone number and our email address. Thanks very much for watching.